first thing I probably should say is that I work with an enterprise academic unit in the university, which means that we're not judged on citations, we're judged on impact. And we're very lucky to work with a number of very transformative, forward-looking people who are trying to work out what is best for their kids and their systems, governments, sometimes just networks of schools. So what paradigm shift are they seeking, which we're helping them with? To me, it probably boils down to the view they have that the traditional curriculum of literacy and numeracy, subject disciplines or technical skills is no longer fit for purpose in this world. And they're shifting their curricula, mainly they're shifting their learning ambitions away from that towards a couple of things, and let me just quickly mention two of them. One is they want their students to become producers of learning, not consumers of teaching. That's a really big shift, really big shift. Someone said that school is a place where kids go to watch teachers work. Right?
So, if you think about it, a lot of times.
That's got to shift. That's a radical transformation. The second thing is they're not teaching book knowledge and just knowing. They're teaching competence. And not just competence of the kind that AI can deliver, knowing, synthesising and whatever. They're talking about competence that is human competence that we'll need to live in a digital world. And that's things like the social skills, communication, collaboration, empathy, living with ambiguity, having drive, all of those things. So they're the shifts that they're making, and they are deep shifts.
Yeah, I think that's a very in-depth and very straightforward way of saying it. Chris, I wanted to move to you. So Arizona State University is one of the largest public universities by enrollment in the United States, and it was founded in 1885. So that's a long journey of education that this university has been on. Have you found more recently that alternative education pathways and digital credentials need to be more integrated in education systems, or are traditional learning models working just fine?
Well, first off, I want to apologize to my fellow panelists for sitting in the wrong seat, causing mass discord at the World Government Summit, so I apologize for that. And secondly, I'll kind of take a note out of the book of my friend from Austin Community College that, you know, technology is one thing, but mindset, philosophy is just as important. And I'll get to the technology point because we do need that as well. So most universities are driven by the concept of exclusivity and elitism, right? So you get many, many people to apply, and very, very few are accepted, and then you're considered excellent. So it's a model that goes back to the Oxford and Cambridge system. I'm an Oxonian. I graduated from Oxford. It goes into the elite Ivies that are in America. I went to Harvard Business School, so I buy into that to some extent. I've been sort of brought up that way. But what we did 23 years ago, not going back to the 1800s, is when President Michael Crow joined ASU, established this charter that said we're going to judge ourselves by whom we include in their outcomes as opposed to whom we exclude. I'll just say it one more time. We're going to judge ourselves by whom we include in their outcomes as opposed to whom we exclude. Therefore, we're going to do everything we can to meet every person, every learner in the world, thank you for the word learner, and help them achieve their hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And therefore, you have to use technology. You have to use technology to scale, to get access to people who would not otherwise have had it. And what that has led to, and you mentioned, Lenah, our size of our institution, we have 185,000 students. 85,000 on ground on our campuses, 100,000 online.
Okay.
And we have another 700,000 learners that are upskilling and reskilling, and those 700,000 are primarily using technology-enhanced opportunities. In a given year, we'll touch 25 million people with our learning technologies, and we think that makes a real difference in the world. So it's the technology using technology and infusing technology and leveraging it to get better outcomes and evaluating those outcomes for society's social transformation is part of it, but the mindset that you have to have an inclusive mindset, we say inclusive excellence at scale, is just as important as the tech.
Yeah, we'll discuss that mindset because I really believe that changing it is a bit of a challenge, but we'll get to that. Michael, MTC is a growing network of public and private schools committed to reinventing how all students prepare for a college, career, and their life. How does that reinvention look like for you? Can you explain that?
Well, first I want to thank Chris for giving us an opportunity for real-time collaboration and problem solving. So what MTC represents a network of secondary schools or high schools in the United States. And to understand high schooling in the United States, you need to know two things. We currently have significant problems with attendance and preparedness. Attendance is chronic absenteeism. We literally have hundreds of thousands of school-age children who have stopped going to school. We've lost them, essentially, for formal education.
And why? Why is that, in your view?
Because, well, I have a theory about that, and some of it is COVID. We basically changed the permission structures about going to school. We took something that was inviolable. You have to go to school, and suddenly you could log in or not. And so many children, having been exposed to that, just stopped. The other reason is that I think it's not relevant, engaging, or useful. And that, I think, is the answer to your question. If we want to prepare students for college and career, which I think we would all agree should be one of the primary goals of secondary schooling, we have to rethink, as Sandra said, whether the current models are fit for purpose or not. And we have a pretty strongly held belief that they are not. So the schools that are part of our network are embracing different ways of, different modes and models of education. Project-based learning, interdisciplinary, self-directed. We have teams of high schoolers who are working with local small businesses or community nonprofits to solve problems, and faculty are serving as mentors. So it's a way of immediately getting much more authentic engagement and also transfer and application of what they're learning in real time.
Okay, very interesting. Sandra, back to you. So basically empowering systems and schools to assess and credential different competencies is basically changing the mindset. This is what we were just discussing. And that must be very challenging. I mean, this is centuries of an educational system that we've built on. What challenges are there, and especially for widespread adoption of this idea?
Well, I've got a couple of comments to make about that. First of all, widespread adoption is much harder in places like Australia, England and the US, and I envy those who are ministers of education in countries that have got less entrenched Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Melbourne style ambitions for their students. So that would be the first thing I'd say. Second thing is, if you actually want to change those ambitions away from the traditional and towards something that's going to enable students to thrive, and I really liked the term earlier today with our keynote speaker who started this session, radical inclusiveness. So it's got to be every student we're talking about, not just the 20% who succeed now or whatever. But to do that, it feels daunting because it feels as though teachers have to change what they're going to do, parents have to change their views, students have to be not so exam focused, everything has to change. And the reason systems and schools come to us, I think, is because they know that if you change the rules, you change the behaviour. What sets the rules? It's the assessment and credentialing system and the regulatory framework of credentials that everyone works within. And so that's why I think that, you know, that assessment as a lever for change is, that's a radical position for an assessment person to have, but I think it really works.
Chris, I'm going to ask you a very direct question here. So ASU, we're talking about assessment, credentialing system. I'm a student applying to the university. If I come in there have to be high schools that you are that you know of that have a system like American system. There's the British system, French system, and I'm sure there's a lot of metrics and measurements from students who are coming from abroad and from inside the U.S. And this is a very deeply rooted admission system, I'm sure. So have there been any changes to that in order to incorporate what we are discussing here and changing the educational system? And what if a student came with an online, credentials that is not the traditional way, as in a high school with a certificate, and you stamp it and you go and send it in with, would they be easily accepted? Very honestly here.
Yeah, I'll say two things. One, you said we talked about inclusiveness and radical inclusive. I love that. I would add inclusive excellence at scale is what ASU tries to aspire to. And I would mention that we are an American Association of University School, top 71 in the country, with the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Texas, and Michigans of the world. So we do that in addition to. So we think you can have it sort of all ways. In terms of pathways to success, I'll use, there are multiple examples, but I'll use one I think is most compelling. Years ago, there was a young woman in Afghanistan who was under Taliban rule who had gotten a hold of some of our courses online and had taken them and done quite well. She had found some free courses, something like that. She wrote a letter to President Crow or got in touch with him and said, hey, I really don't have the opportunity to use these courses toward anything else because I'm in a country where I'm not allowed to learn as a woman, as a girl. So we said to ourselves, it's not her fault, it's our fault. As the speaker from Sierra Leone said, you never really make a difference unless you make it amongst the least amongst us that are most sort of put out. So we came up working with the idea that she kind of gave us, this idea of what we call universal learner courses. So Lenah, what we do with our universal learner courses is we have about 60 or so courses that we've done the analysis of, and we say, if you pass this course with a B or higher, you're going to demonstrate that you are university ready, college ready. So now if you pay $25 anywhere in the world, you take this course using your phone, your mobile, your iPad or whatever device, you make a B or higher, you pay $400, it gets transcripted. 4 courses or more, 4 courses with a B or higher, you're accepted at ASU. Full stop. Anywhere in the world. Now, they're going to be, and we offer 300-degree programs online, so there's a way to actually follow up from there. But just think about that. Incarcerated, poor, rural, whatever. No one ever told you about how to do the traditional way to get into school. You weren't lucky enough to get into these competency-based credits that Mike is offering to get in. You just had the gumption and the grit to find this course. Now, there are lots of things we need to do with that in terms of funding for that to make it even more so, but we've accepted maybe 8,000 students into our university that way. We have about 3,000 in there now that are going full-time, 30,000 that are taking courses, and graduated a couple thousand in the last few years. So that is a pathway to a university degree for anybody, regardless of their background, and we're very excited. It's infinitely scalable, and we think that's a way to sort of say, you are welcome here.
Amazing. Mike, from your network of schools that are reinventing, the way we look at education and what Chris has just said right now, it's an amazing example of something that's happening on the ground. But on the other hand, you're coming from the other side. Are you finding that this is common? Are you finding that this is easy and accessible for your way of thinking and your way of looking at education through the network that you have created for your students?
It's definitely the right question. It sort of asks, how do you affect large-scale system change, right? And, Mastery Transcript Consortium, I was talking previously about the consortium, right? It's that collective of schools and districts that are embracing new learning models. We have built with them an alternative credentialing model. The idea is that new schooling models require new credentialing models. That's called the Mastery Transcript. It is an actual physical, digital transcript that is competency and evidence-based. And I'm happy to tell you that it works. Over almost 600 colleges and universities in the US have accepted learners without grades, without credit hours, in some cases without even course titles, just competencies and evidence of learning.
Sandra, competencies that you're discussing, you were saying as well. Is there a metric or measurements or, the education system for a long time, we have a metric that everyone is sort of okay with. A's, B's, C's, 90 out of 100, 95 out of 100. There's from 1 to 5 your GPA. So this is something that we know with our eyes closed. But what we're speaking about here is competencies, skills, and this falls under it a lot of different characteristics. How do you measure that for students? How do you measure all of these things so we can go to ASU and say, hey, these students have these competencies. What is the evidence that you're going to give?
Well, look, on the one hand, any teacher can probably put together a rubric of some description and say, this student is here and that student is there. And you can do that on any kind of competency or whatever. What we've found when we're talking to employers and universities is this. They want to know whether they can trust what the representation means for what that student knows and can do. So we've put a lot of effort into defining standards in these transferable competencies, standards that teachers and students and employers and universities can understand. So, and putting, fairly trust factors, we call them moderation, comparability, calibrations underneath it. In Australia, we've now got 50% of the universities looking at it. I have to say, Mike, though, they're the 50% that are easiest to get into anyway. So you've got to be careful about that. But we've also got our top class ones looking at it as well, because
you've got to start somewhere.
They know that the same thing is going to apply to them, and that employers are saying to them, it's not good enough to get an A. We want to know what that student knows and can do. So tell us. So that's what you need to do.
Amazing. Chris, very quickly, we're almost out of time. I just very directly also.
Sure.
50 years from now, 70 years from now, 100 years from now, are we still going to see the same traditional educational pathway in universities, in your view? Or are they going to coexist with these new educational pathways that we were just discussing? Future outlook.
Well, I hope not. I hope it's not going to be exactly the same. It'd be like medicine. Would you say, in 100 years, we'll be doing medicine the exact same way we did it, that we do it today? You'd be, oh my goodness, we failed miserably. So I think it's a sort of an ampersand play. Lenah, it'd be and. There'll be traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic. People will still do those sorts of things and write poetry and all sorts of things. But the integration of work into learning into work, non-traditional transcripts will look more traditional. Technology will be, a personalized learning agent for building competencies in the technical side or in the traditional university side will become fused. And like I said, if we don't do that, we've failed because we failed to tap into the aspirations of the human condition.
Mike, finally, your key message to policymakers and regulators to ensure that these innovations in education are scalable, effective, and widely recognized.
So I think if I had one message to policymakers, it's rethink how we assign credit to learning. The dominant model today is we count the number of hours that young people are exposed to learning. What we should be doing is looking at demonstrations of what they can actually do. Sandra was completely right before. We have a trust issue. We've always known as educators that looking at portfolios of student work is one of the better ways to assess what they can actually do. But that model has real issues with reliability and frankly with scalability. And that's why we're very optimistic about technology. In May of 2024, MTC was acquired by ETS. And we are part of a joint initiative between ETS and the Carnegie Foundation in the States to develop more scalable ways of looking at portfolios of student work and essentially extracting or inferring what young people can do in terms of their skill development. So I think technology, it's not a panacea, but it's definitely one of the answers.
Thank you so much. Such a riveting conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm deeply thankful for hearing your insights, and I'm sure our audience is as well. Give it up for our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.